Conway received an honorary doctorate in engineering from the University of Victoria yesterday morning. And we are we're very proud that Lynn Conway is now one of our graduates as well. She's a computer scientist and engineer who helped to pioneer the modern technology in Silicon Valley and the kind of technology that we all rely upon today for so much of our lives. She did foundational research in computer architecture at IBM in the 1960s, and the computer scientists and engineers in the room will forgive me, but as I understand what that particular piece of her contribution was, is she figured out how to get computers to do really a lot of things at one time. She underwent a gender transition in 1968, and IBM fired her in spite of the fact that that alone was a tremendous contribution. She restarted her career in stealth mode, went underground, and with her new name and new life, and only a decade later she was authoring a book with Carver Mead, which became one of the most foundational textbooks in computer engineering. That's called Introduction to VLSI Systems. It kind of became the Bible of computer chip designers. It has sold upwards of 100,000 copies. Now, if you can imagine a computer science book selling that many copies, and it's kind of amazing. So her innovations have enabled the large-scale mass production of silicon chips that allows us to have all the computer technology, all the smartphones, the GPS, the self-driving cars, all the things that we rely upon in our computer-saturated world. Without her innovations, we wouldn't be here today. She's received a lot of other high honors for her pioneering computer engineering work, including Computer Science Computer Pioneer Award of the IEEE Computer Society. She's a fellow of the IEEE. Tom, what does that stand for?
The Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers.
Thank you. All right. I have to ask my engineer friends. I knew what two of the E's were, but I couldn't remember what the third E stood for. She's been elected to the National Academy of Engineering, and she has also been inducted as a Computer History Museum Fellow awardee. And when she received that award, she was cited as not only a distinguished technology leader, but someone who has forever changed the world with their accomplishments. So please help me to welcome Lynn Conway.
Thanks, Aaron, and it's wonderful to be here with you all. This has been quite a whirlwind set of events the last few days, and after yesterday, I'm still slightly worn out, but I'll try to hang in there and do my best tonight. Actually, this feels a little more relaxed than the formal kind of things in the university. So here I'm just Lynn, and I'm not really going to be talking about technology. I'm going to be going meta to that, talking about things that in many ways are far more important. And the particular thing that I'll be talking about today is this question that Megan Smith raised about women's contributions in science and engineering and math being erased from history. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to explore a case study of such erasure and present basically a rather counterintuitive conjecture about possible underlying causes and effects. And so, this is sort of nascent sociology that I've been doing, and a conjecture I've come up with that I'm kind of putting forward to get reactions to and so forth. And there's a lot of investigation going on right now about many other, not tens, but hundreds, thousands of women whose contributions are actually knowable about, but not known about. But now, with our modern ability to probe back into the past much more easily and do forensics on it, it's possible to know and help others know about their contributions. So I think this is really, we're in a fascinating time. And I wanted to say one thing, and that is the title, An Invisible Woman, I take in remembrance of pioneering novelist Ralph Ellison, author of Invisible Man, 1952, which had a huge, profound effect on thinking in that era, an area when I was in high school. And so, if you aren't familiar with his work, I would encourage people to check it out. Work for the ages. So, well, in order to unfold the story, what I'm going to do is a few reflections on LGBT pride and life trajectories that draw a bit on just a little bit about my history, history with my husband Charles Rogers, who's here, and kind of put us in a certain place in time. And then I'm going to actually talk about visualizing historical erasures. Then we're going to look at a particular case study, namely the one I've been involved in, and then I'll do the conjecture. Okay? And as it's sort of afterwards, I want to pop up a level and do some thought experiments with you. We can make this a bit interactive, actually. And I'd like to share some insights into the evolution of culture in animals. And it's a topic I've been very interested in kind of forever. And there's some really cool stories there that I think could help us grasp what some of these issues are. And then I want to conclude with a little view ahead about where things might be going, but mainly point you to another talk on that topic that the slideshows are online. Well, to sort of set the stage for this, I'd like to tell you about some reflections that I put in an essay after Charlie and I attended the White House reception in celebration of LGBT Pride Month in 2013. And I'm just going to read these for you, and they're up there. But this will help you kind of quickly get a little bit of an idea of my background, and also a bit of why this story is starting to emerge now. So it was on a sultry June afternoon, as my husband and I walked towards the White House. I reflected back on my gender transition in 1968. You see, I'd been shamed as a social outcast. I lost all my friends, family, friends, and all social support. I'd been fired by IBM, lost a promising research career, and in many cities, I could have been arrested or worse yet, put in a mental hospital. I don't think people have any idea quite how bad it was back then. Evading those fates, I completed my transition and I took on a secret new identity. I started all over again as a contract programmer. It turns out that was a weird time. You know, people needed programmers for the rapid spread of the IBM kind of office machinery, and it turned out that men didn't like to use keyboards because that was like, you know, being a secretary. And so there was a sudden opportunity for a whole vast wave of women who'd studied math or science or whatever, who actually weren't afraid to use typewriters and probably figured out they'd end up as secretaries to become programmers. So I kind of snuck through that wormhole in social space-time and ended up as a contract programmer. And you know, spycraft kind of building a career again. But see, the thing is, and this is really important to imagine now, any outing back then, I'd have become instantly unemployable, on the streets for good. And I mean on the streets. You know, the alternative was sex work. I hope you really understand that. Back then. So, and that continued. You need to realize that continued for 30 years. I covered my past, always looking over my shoulder as if a spy in my own country. But it was now, June 13, 2013, and what a contrast. My husband Charlie and I, with many other advocates, were going to join the President's White House reception for LGBT Pride Month. And it was really amazing. The year was full of joy, and as we awaited the President, I began reflecting further. By then, I'd been out for 15 years, or so I thought. I had been out on the internet, revealing my past to colleagues, out as an advocate for trans people and as an activist against psychiatry's pathologization of gender variance. And people in the trans community who are here will know that I've, you know, waged a really amazing internet war against various key figures who are now various negative things have happened to, including Zucker in Toronto, who eventually got fired and almost run out of town for his reparatism on trans children. But anyway, that I had been involved in that, and yet, you know, I wasn't really out. In other words, I was retired and living out in the country in a really cool place, and mostly out on the internet. It was one thing to hide in the back rooms of Xerox Palo Research Center for decades before launching the innovations as a hidden hand behind the veil of microelectronics revolution. See, back then I didn't mind being visible in my field back then, or that no one had a clue what I was doing or who was doing it. Because see, I was thrilled to even have a job. Can you picture like that? If you go back to Park, I was just amazed that I even had a job. Okay. But now we're back 2013, but out as many shades of gray. And in the recent years, I kept on partly covering, shyly holding back, lingering in the darker shadows. Because although times had changed, I clung on to old habits. Down through the decades, no one could explain how this revolution actually happened, and the results were simply taken for granted. Although I gained vital knowledge about generating such engineering paradigm shift, I feared my personal history would loom large in folks' minds. It would obscure any attempts at explaining how and what I'd actually done. So it wasn't until 2012 that I got up the nerve to publish a career memoir. It was published in the IEEE Solid State Circus magazine. And I began telling the story simply of how the revolution had come about. But now we're back, and the president entered the room, and I glanced around, and I took in the vibes. And as he began to speak, I grasped how far we'd come. The times had more than changed. A fresh wind was sweeping through our society, especially amongst the younger generation. And then I thought of the millions of other LGBT people out there, and I tried to envision the lifelong struggles against stigmatization and ostracism, losses of families and employment, oppression by having to cover, often not fully engaging life, nor being known for who they were, or what they'd done, or who they'd loved and who loved them. See? So in a flash, I saw the vastness of the suffering down through time, and it hit me. We've come so far so fast that now many others can begin uncovering too. After all, freedom isn't just an external concept framed by our laws. It's a gift of the spirit we must give ourselves as we go towards the brighter shades of out. As you simply stop covering and become freer. So I wanted to set that as sort of a context of a point in time where suddenly I stopped being so afraid of just trying to tell the story I'm going to tell now. See? And that wasn't that long ago. It was 2013. Okay. Where's my mouse? Don't you just love technology? Side effects. There's always side effects. So with this as backdrop, let's think about history's treatment of women's contributions in STEM. And the way I'd like to begin this is just to have you watch and listen to Megan Smith revealing questions and thoughts about this.
And up till the 80s, computer science was sort of 30 to 40% women, and we've just tanked. You know, we talked about Steve Jobs. There's these incredible photographs from the launch of the Macintosh in the 80s. And there's the Rolling Stone pictures that were published. And so the historic record shows this group actually of 10 people in a pyramid, actually 11, 7 men and 4 women. And every photograph you see with the Mac team, Joanna Hoffman, who was the product manager, a great teammate of Steve Jobs, Susan Carey did all the graphics and user interface, artist side. None of them made it into the Jobs movie in the Mac scene. They're not even cast, and every man in the photographs is in the movie with a speaking role. And so it's debilitating to our young women to have their history or almost erased or uncalled.
Okay,
and
other than the blanket discrimination,
yeah.
How does that happen? I mean, what's the interest of somebody not recognizing the contribution of women? How do they benefit from that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see any real benefit of it.
Of course they're not. So
Yeah.
why do they do it?
I don't know, but it's something we need to get over. You know, Katherine Johnson, African-American woman who calculated the trajectories for Alan Shepard, John Glenn, who wouldn't fly without Katherine checking the math, and the Apollo mission. You know, there's no African-American woman technical person in the Apollo movies that I ever saw as a kid.
Yeah.
You know, we got to get these in there because if you know your past, as we're discussing, your future is different.
What's interesting is that I saw that interview just a little over a month before I had to go to NSF to give an LGBT pride talk at NSF headquarters. It was very well attended, a lot of program managers and so forth. And that was the point where I thought about and came up with this conjecture I'm going to present tonight. So this is really based on thinking that started not that long ago, you see, just back in early in 2015. And it was prompted by that question, why? Now, what is happening here? Why? What is going on? So let's think about this. Now, just look at the pictures and think about what happened. Although 4 women were on that team, not a single one was cast into biopic jobs. And it's not just harder for women to break into STEM fields, but many contributions they do make aren't celebrated. Because of that, it's debilitating for our young women to have their history almost erased. In other words, the history of the women's contributions erased. So how can they move forward and imagine that whatever they did, anybody would ever even hear about it? And this, you have to grasp how hard that is on people when they're young. And what's really amazing is just recently, a lot has come out about Katherine Johnson. There's an amazing book. Here, I show a picture of it. Hidden Figures, the story of the African-American women who helped win the space race. Her story is there, but there was a whole group of women, mathematicians, and stories are unknown. Katherine Johnson in particular, here's a picture of her at her desk at Langley back in 1960. And this, I think, is very cool. You see, there she is, 98, Vanity Fair 2016. Fortunately, see, she lived long enough to see her story told. Now take a look at me, okay? I'm gonna be around for a while. I'm working hard on it. You know, I'm into training. You know, I got energizer bunch. So, you know, I figure I got 20 more years. You know, I'll be 80 in 14 months, and I think I'll go to 100. You know, unless there's something crazy happens. But you see, and so there's something to that. You know, people who engage in weirdness sort of be aware that sometimes it'll come back to haunt them. You see? Very interesting to think about. Now, I must say that the trail of amazing, stunningly amazing women who've done things that it's hard really to express how cool they are. I think perhaps the greatest example is Emmy Noether. How many people have heard of who Emmy Noether is? Aha. Yeah, okay. I won't go in depth on this, but I think you could take a look at her Wikipedia page. A lot came out about her at the sort of centennial of Einstein's, the 100th anniversary of his great papers. And what it turns out is that a mathematical theorem that she developed as part of a very broad set of contributions in mathematics that was based on her interacting with Einstein and on developing ideas based on the strangeness of the emergent physics that he was developing. She came up with a way of basically realizing that when you find symmetries in nature, especially in the mathematics that you can overlay on nature, when you find symmetries, you often have, in fact, stumbled onto something that's conserved. You've stumbled onto something that is a fundamental thing that's conserved. And so as physics move forward, the notions of adapting, you know, is conservation of energy still going to work? Is conservation of momentum still going to work in the new emergent physics envelope? Well, it turned out yes. And in fact, you could even push the envelope by looking for symmetries in the strange world that you were beginning to see. And it was just crisp mathematics, unbelievable. So actually, she is not only one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, but one of the greatest mathematical physicists of all time. And nobody knows who she is, except, you know, a kind of rare cognoscente. So Don't you think there are more stories like that out there? Okay. Anyway, here's what she said about her work. It's one of the quotes she left. "My methods are really methods of working and thinking. This is why they've crept in everywhere anonymously." Think about that. Her method of thinking exponentiated all across science and engineering anonymously. Isn't that interesting? I want you to kind of keep that in mind as we go further in this story. Okay, there's almost something about the fact that it's anonymous makes it easier to spread because nobody's stopping the spread. Nobody has become the expert who is the only one that knows it and can pass the tablets down. It are ideas that are so fundamental that you can share them with anyone and it just spreads. Very interesting. This effect seen throughout the history of women of science, and there's this great 3-volume series by Margaret Rossiter. People interested in this area, this is foundational. These are really great volumes, each about this thick, but full of similar stories. And what's strange is that when you look at the periods that it covers, from back in the 1800s to the early 1900s, and then another volume up in the later 1900s, what you find is that the position of women in society was actually changing considerably during that time. I mean, things were a lot better in the latter part of the 20th century than they were in the early 1800s, okay? However, the processes of erasure from the history are stationary, are exactly the same throughout the whole period. That is interesting. That is interesting. You know, it's like, you can sort of see the math on that, like, what the heck? Okay. So, these are great books and documents many case histories. Well, in '93, she coined the term Matilda effect for the systematic repression and denial of contributions of women scientists, whose work is often attributed to male colleagues. And that was coined in kind of to echo and in recognition of the Matthew effect, coined in '68 by Columbia University sociologist Robert K. Merton, describing how eminent scientists often get more credit than a lesser-known researcher, even if their work was similar. For example, a prize will almost always be awarded to the most senior researcher in a project, even if the work was all done by a grad student. And I've myself heard many professors actually brag about the awards they got that were done by some work done by someone else. I mean, actually brag about it. It's really quite interesting. And I'm not sure. I guess I think that's cool. I don't know. Okay, let's go through this case study that I was involved in. And why are we looking at it? Well, I think Aaron alluded to some of this, that we're going to be talking about the mechanization of mathematics by printing little electronic machinery in silicon. And it turns out that's the stuff that makes everything out here get animated and work and so forth. So you're seeing a lot of specific things, but inside them are these chips that have little machinery printed on them that various people that know about how to do that stuff have figured out and designed and printed. And so that's what's embedded in making all this stuff work. So it's really the mechanization of ever-increasing amount of mathematics, logic, and program scripts, and ever more powerful VLSI silicon chips. Now the stage is set for all this back in the 60s when the first integrated circuits were developed where you could actually print a small number, a moderate number, of transistors and the wiring and it connects them on silicon chips, creating artwork, the maths that did the layering and of the different layers that would be involved, usually just cut by hand, and then photographed and then printed, replicated many times on these circuits. So here's some pictures of early ones. And what happened was the advances in the lithography enabled ever finer features to be printed, so you could print increasing numbers of transistors on single chips. And in 1971, there was a really cool watershed cross with the introduction of the Intel 404, and it's the first single chip microprocessor, little computer, little 4-bit wide computer on a chip. Got into a lot of interesting things, little electronic calculators of various kinds, and things started to take off. Well, here's a picture looking down. You peel the cover off that thing, and here's a picture of it. This is just about, like that big. There's 2,300 transistors on that. But 2,300 transistors, you make a little computer. Now, Gordon Moore at Intel, where this was happening, had been observing, looking back on the number of transistors you could print leading up to this. He began to notice that something was happening where roughly every 2 years you could double the number of transistors you could print on a chip, and that would work and be commercially viable. And so what we're seeing is, and there's the beginnings of it, it's a scatter plot, but it's going up this straight line where the vertical axis it's a logarithmic, so that it looks like a straight line, but there's actually a huge exponentiation going here. Now, Carver Mead, professor at Caltech, who was a consultant to Intel and knew Moore, named this idea of Moore's. He called it Moore's Law. And I kind of do a little quote there. I thought that was a very clever career move. You see how that works? That's really interesting. And now Mead's student, Bruce Eisen, actually, he's quite a physicist. He went on to Ecuadorian. He went on to play a leading role in starting a university down there, and he's been engaged in doing actual serious physics for a long time. But he came up with the actual studies, data, and insights that said that, you know what, you could keep making these smaller and smaller to where you could put about 1 million or even several million on a chip before you had to start worrying about the physics not working anymore. Now, of course, it's gone way more than that, but we're sure you could get to 1 million, and 1 million was like a lot more than a couple thousand. And looking ahead, it was conceivable that by 1990, you see that point up there, that an entire supercomputer could be printed on a single chip. And by that, a supercomputer of the kind that I knew about, that I'd been involved in, that took about 1 million transistors to make because of the kind of massive parallelism in the instruction scheduling in order to make it go fast. So this really, a little bit of background on this. Mead was at Caltech. I was at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. My boss was a guy named Bert Sutherland, and laboratory manager. And at Caltech, a computer science department had just been formed with Ivan Sutherland as the chairman. And so Bruce and Bert and Ivan, kind of interesting, they were both grad students of Claude Shannon. So once you start to connect up this caliber of people we're talking about. And so when I said to set up a push, what had happened was Bert and Ivan had sort of grasped and recognized the fact that there was going to be no way to deal with the complexity because of the way chips were being designed back then by manually cutting Ruby lists and taking photographs of them to make the mass to make them. It just wasn't going to scale. And it was right at that time that something else was happening that could be brought to bear on it. Because here's what it was happening. Mostly at PARC. And this was a huge set of seminal innovations in personal computing and networking. There was the innovation of the interactive display mouse controlled personal computer. It was the Alto at PARC. And actually, back then, in 73, 74, 75, as I began my work at PARC, using an Alto felt just like using this, okay? The screen resolution was lower, the processing rate was lower, but the ideas of interactivity, what you see on the screen is what you get when you print it out, that kind of thing, that had all just come into being in the small community that was evolving this technology in real time at Park. Local area network so that machines in a building could be connected together, and if you worked on your machine, you could send your information to someone else, they could build on it, send it back. You could work together on things. And the laser printer. So if you wrote stuff, if you did diagrams, you could print this stuff out. And if you saw documents that were cool, well, you could file those away. You didn't have to keep all the hard copy forever. But if you wanted, you could print it out. So all this stuff was coming up around. Now start to connect. Okay, I'm at Park, and you sort of see this is really electrifying. And then there was DoD's ARPANET, which was just starting. Here's a map in '71 where it was just fledgling. But in '75, Cerf and Kahn came up with the interneting protocol. That meant you could take a bunch of different networks and you could communicate easily across them. And suddenly this early ARPANET started popping up, guess where? At, well, various military places, but mainly at the leading computer science departments at the major research universities, MIT, Stanford, Berkeley, Illinois, Caltech, and oh, by the way, Park was one of the nodes. Okay, so we'll come to that. So now, with that as sort of backdrop, there was a breakout of innovations, abstract innovations at Park, which included some work. It was basically this work I did. That it was a scalable set of design rules, digital design rules, as ratio dimensionless inequality equations. And that sounds like mumbo jumbo because it sounds like math, but it's actually a pretty simple idea. The idea was that if you had rules that said how close wires should be together, could get together before they wouldn't print, or how wide they had to be, or when wires crossed each other and there was some ion implantation, how you had to do that so that you'd actually make a transistor and so forth. Some very simple rules of what you couldn't do. You couldn't go beyond what a certain inequality said. There's some boundary conditions, but aside from that, you could do anything you want. And so it'd be like building. You could design a chip almost like people would design some huge model railroading thing. I want the trains to run around this way. I'm going to make wires here. They stop here, and stuff gets loaded on and goes over there. And you can actually, computer architects really they think about some of this stuff that way, and you can just draw the wires graphically. And it turns out there were 3 levels of wires back then. There was one in the bottom were green, then there was like insulator, then in the middle they were red, then there was insulator, and then there's blue on the top, which is aluminum. And it turns out everywhere a red wire crossed a green wire, it makes a transistor. Just the fact that they cross. The voltage goes up on the red wire and the switch closes on the green wire. So it's just like building things on relays or something. It's actually so simple, it's unbelievable. Most of the people working on this stuff actually didn't see it top to bottom because, long story, but it turned out to be simple. So I framed this in these rules. The thing about these rules is they're dimensionless and they're ratioed. So what that meant was that you simply scale the rules with one factor to scale them for the resolution of the process you had. So you could make a design that would work up at big fat wires because that's all you could make. But when you could make little skinny tiny ones, now those same designs would work, only you could just print a lot more of this stuff. So now instead of making a little railroad track that goes around in a circle, you can make a huge, vast model railroad empire and put it all in one chip. Okay. And this actually really had some amazing effects. But anyway, it enabled these designs to be numerically encoded, scale, reused as Moore's law rapidly advanced. And importantly, they enabled subsystem designs to be simply expressed in the code that describes the graphics that you're going to print. And you could open source share that code. Okay. Now, what's the meta level idea going on here? This is a little more abstract, but actually I think this is actually easily visualizable. See, as the chip technology scales down according to Moore's law, so you can make ever more, ever faster transistors, printable and individual. As time passes, you can imagine launching the follow technosocial scripted process. So now we're talking about a social technological process that has a script. Okay, and here is the script. Step I. You use design tools on your current computer to design chipsets for a more powerful computer. Okay? Then you get those printed. You print the more powerful chipsets using what we call foundries, which is a place you send the files to get them printed. You know, you send files over the internet to get them printed in a magazine. You know, that's all this is. And then you use some of those chipsets to update the current computer and design tools. And then you repeat. So this is a process over time that's social and it's technical. And if ever more engineers and design tool builders did this on an expanding number of increasingly powerful computers, the iterative technosocial expansion process could exploratorily and innovatively generate ever more powerful digital systems. So everything is contingent, it's evolutionary and contingent, but it's a creative process. And so this you can have in your head, okay? That it could exponentiate. So, okay, now wouldn't it be fun to make that happen? Well, wait a minute. Where are all the engineers and programmers going to come from, and how are they going to learn to do this? See, there's engineers and programmers in the loop, and as this gets bigger and bigger, you need more and more of them, okay? How are they going to learn to do this? Well, I began documenting these methods in an evolving computer-edited book. Here's a look at it, and it's printed out on a laser printer. The color pages weren't; those were just copies. But basically, we began using our Alta computers not only to design chips, but to design the knowledge of it and put it in a book that was also evolving. So the computer-edited evolving book was printed on the laser printers at Park, and that became the draft for this textbook. And in addition, we used our Altas at Park to generate and code many open source cell layout designs for key subsystems that almost any design anybody wanted to do, they needed. And some of them were programmable logic arrays, clock drivers, I/O pads, and so forth. Don't worry about the buzzwords, but you know, I/O pads actually isn't complicated. It would be the stuff that brings a bunch of circuitry out and has a really big clump of aluminum in the middle of it, where you're going to gold bond the wires to get the signals on and off the chip. You don't want to have everybody have to design those. Everybody's going to use on the chip, so you just give everybody those, and now they just design the model railroad layout. And you'll notice that all of this simply ends up as code. It's just code. It's a script. Now, following the script that Charles Steinmetz used to propagate his revolutionary AC electricity methods at Union in 1912, I introduced these new methods in a special course at MIT in 1978. And the thing about what Steinmetz had done is he had, in the 1890s, made some seminal sort of mathematical, physical innovations that would enable engineers to design AC electric circuitry of the type that's used all across our modern electrical power systems, and design it using just algebra instead of complicated differential equations. And he presented that in papers and became actually well known and famous for the work, but it didn't spread, you see, because only the kind of elite cognoscenti would read the papers. So what he did was he wrote several books, one on the methods and one on the mathematics of the methods, and began teaching them as a regular engineering course at Union College. And the engineers that came out of those courses could immediately go in the field and deal with AC electricity. And it was that spread of those students and those courses that generated the exponentiation of AC technology. I knew this story, I knew it well, and for various reasons, Steinmetz had always been a hero of mine. So I knew the story, and when I was at this point in time, I realized, wait a minute, this is like what Steinmetz, I know what Steinmetz did. The idea here was that in the first part of this course, the students learn how to design. The second part, they design. So they learn how to design chips in 7 weeks and design a project with some other students in 7 weeks. Got those fabricated, and here's some pictures from the courses. And you know, what's amazing is, here's a picture of the multiple, see, these were student projects, they weren't full designs, so you could print a lot of them on a single chip, and it was a way to share the chips, and you didn't need to make as many wafers that you would normally make for all these huge numbers of designs. But you see this design down in that corner there? That was a complete Lisp microprocessor designed by a grad student at MIT, and that was the first chip design he'd ever done. And of course, now you think back in the industry out there, casts of hundreds were involved in designing a chip, all doing, you know, little pieces of it as it filtered down to get more and more complicated. But now with these methods, it was a matter of just creating some code that spun out the geometry, which you could then send off and get printed. What really counted is, do you have any idea at the top level of how to write a great novel? Did you understand what Lisp was and how to mechanize it? You see? So the idea was to give people like that this realization of, well, just sketch out your model railroad layout and we'll get it printed. You see? Now, here's where it starts to get interesting. That course stunned various people in Silicon Valley because chip designs up to then that was kind of a mystery only grasped by a few computer engineers working for the chip manufacturers. In other words, in order to write a great novel, you had to work for the printing plant. Imagine that. You see, there were just a few printing plants, and the people who were the architects of these microprocessors just happened to be the computer engineers that were working for them. You see, and so many other top research universities want to offer a course like this. But how can they do that? And I began pondering this, and I grasped the answer. Now you have to realize now, you're seeing an unfolding of things in real time that are contingent, that are not pre-planned. Just an idea occurs and you just put it in motion. This is sort of irritating sometimes, where all of a sudden, you know, Lynn is off doing something. But it's like you see something to do and you just know you have to do it. And so it wasn't like you wrote a proposal and got funded to do it. You kind of did it bootleg, undercover with the stuff you were normally doing. See? So I had an idea, and that was rerun the MIT course at a dozen research universities. So using the lecture notes I used at MIT, say a word about that. At MIT, back then, in stealth, was terrified that somehow I'd get found out, but compelled to teach this course. Before every lecture, I would spend a couple of days, just all day, all in the evening, working out exactly how to unfold that lecture. Every word, every equation, and go through it and get it to where it would unfold nicely. And then I'd go teach that lecture. Then I'd go back to my room in Eastgate, start the process again. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And that went on the whole semester. So I did it, but I kept the notes. And I actually handwrote them so I could read them. So it wasn't too bad. So actually, I could package those up. I had the whole course. And guess what? Someone who had no idea what that was could go in and just simply put that on the board. Now you have to understand, a lot of engineering faculty do this. They get a book, and they may not completely understand what's in there, but things have kind of, after years, been kind of worked out to where they just know if they go in and kind of run this stuff out, somehow the students learn something and go off and do it. That's all really mysterious. I'm serious, and so I had those notes, but now well, how do you get these courses going? Because guess what? None of this would work unless you could print the projects. So then I had this idea. This is like too wild. I had this idea. See, at MIT, I'd sent the projects back to Park for mass making by using the early ARPANET to send the files out. And we were using email to interact a lot. And I had this notion of what if we had a bunch of schools and we had a completely codified procedure. They're all using the same type of focus, going on the same schedule. What if we created an automated email interface where at certain times you would respond to emails and you would send like test files, or you'd queue up first initially, just figuring out what area you would use for your project and so forth. So it was a way of interacting remotely without any of us having to take care of every detailed person and their situation, kind of codifying it. So it turned out like a thing now where you just, or you could design something. You want a t-shirt with a pattern on it, you can get on the internet, you sketch a pattern, you send it off, it gets printed on a t-shirt, right? That's kind of a design e-commerce. So I had this idea of making a thing like that. And it would run, and when the end of the course was, we're going to pull all the designs together, it would pack all those into multi-project chips so that we could get them printed and get the projects back to the students. Okay. So that summer, the summer of 1979, I announced over the then ARPANET, look at it now, here it's an 80, but that's about where it was then. We announced at Park that if people ran courses like the MIT course, that if they ran them successfully at the end of the course and the students did projects, that we would take all those projects and we would turn them into chips. Now you have to imagine, back in 1979, the whole idea of students at these places being able to get their own, sort of little tiny microprocessor-like chips designed, this was like electrifying. See, so you throw out the hook and the bait, and guess what? They all bit. They all took it, and it was really so. Then we had to put together this e-commerce system and get it on the ARPANET while all these courses were starting, and actually I almost got in a lot of trouble for this because, as an example. My boss knew I was doing this, and people I don't think people quite grasped the scale of this, but they thought it would be kind of a cool thing, and so when I announced it, though, there were academics at other major research universities. There would be elder faculty members. One of them came to Park and went and had an emergency meeting with George Paik, the VP there, and said, "Do you have any idea what's happening here? There's this person, no one knows who she is. Lynn Conway has, who the hell is Lynn Conway? She has announced that if all these universities do these courses and send projects, that you're going to send them chips." And I don't think George actually, I'm not sure if he had any idea right quite then. So he called Bert, and Bert told George, really, this is actually okay. We're just doing this thing and see what happens. And I heard about this, and so actually what was amazing is Bert came back and told me what had happened. George had just said, "Don't worry about this, it's okay. This is the sort of thing we do around here." The person had no idea of the other crazy things happening at Park. I mean, they had never met Alan Kay and Smalltalk and all this other wild stuff that was coming out. So this was really not that unusual. But it sort of showed you the signals of resistance to it would be impossible for these courses to work. You could not possibly learn how to design integrated circuits in 7 weeks and then actually get them made a month after the course is over. I mean, this was just not possible, you see? It's very interesting. The person who did that knows that I know who he is. It's really cool. He's actually a good guy. I think really it was sound methods. I mean, I think maybe if I was in his shoes I would have done the same thing, because it just seemed totally impossible. So anyway, it turned out it worked. And it not only provided a large-scale demonstration, operation, validation of the design methods, the courses, the tools, the e-commerce prototyping technology, but it triggered cyclic gain and an exponentiation of the budding VLSI design ecosystem that I'd referred to at the beginning. step I plus 1, I plus 2. And so there was this sort of, it's like a flow chart that shows how the thing unfolded. And I want to point to this diagram because I'll refer to this a couple times. We had come up with a design methodology, created a text, instructor's guide, and other things that could be used to help provide material for courses run by other people. And then there were design environments and tools to take and be able to encode the graphic descriptions you were going to embed into the computer. And then the students themselves did those design projects using those tools. So they were creating projects which were then sent using the new implementation methods, the e-commerce system, to get printed. And those design prototypes were providing feedback on all of that. You see, so this is, the way to think about it, this is a living process. This is a social, technical process. And that's actually how the engineering world works. But this is launching, kind of bootstrapping a new ecosystem in that world. And the way to visualize that now is take that process and realize it's happening in a large network. And this has some really interesting properties because the stuff being produced can enlarge the network. You see, the chips can expand the internet. So this is really interesting. So by 82, 83, these courses were being offered in 113 universities around the world. And actually, as I was envisioning this was an exploration. Setting sail and wandering the seas, exploring this notion of creating emergent technosocial dynamical systems. So let's just envision it like a montage of this unfolding. 1976, how do you cope with VLSI complexity? 1977, coming up with this abstraction of these design rules. 78, taking the emergent book, launching this course at MIT. And 79, launching the multiple courses, which then led to DARPA funding what's called a MOSES program, which we took that technology and transferred it to USC's ISI, Information Sciences Institute, which was really a large DARPA contractor doing all sorts of special software projects. And they ran a service that turned this into a service that just has continued to this day, this prototyping via the ARPANET for research work in this area. And what's totally amazing is over the past 40 years, Moore's Law stayed on track this whole way. And now it is reaching this sort of area where it's saturating. There's saturation occurring. But it stayed all the way, and so it's run as an exponential all that way. Starting with several thousand in 71, it passed 1 million in 91, not 90, but in 91 it passed 1 million, several billion by 2011. So an example, here's an iPhone 5. There's the processor chip up there with the package on top. But let's take a look what's inside that package. It's about that big. Several billion transistors. The wiring is so small that even with just a typical optical microscope, you can't see the individual traces. You see, you really need a really good one because they're being generated in the most arcane ways by exploiting the limits of what you can do with optical work. Very amazing. There's the exponentiation. Okay? It's a compounding of technosocial system interest. You get all this sprawl. Think of all the stuff going on there. Everybody playing roles and all that. Isn't that cool? There's some books about this, and so the story, and kind of looking at it, you can find out a lot in these really interesting books. A really great book about Park, the work about the role of the government in actually funding a lot of this work, and a sort of sociological perspective on the internet's emergence. That's really very good. So they're really good books about it. Okay, now I want to go back and follow the high-tech community's reactions to this. We're going to go through this fairly quickly, but this is the heart of the talk. See, key people sense something significant has happened. And Mead and Conway began getting some awards. And this was a big one. Electronics was a major trade magazine back then. And in 1981, we got recognized. And in 84, 85, on up through 89, we both got some major awards. Tender Award to Moore School, Weatherall Medal, Franklin Institute. Mead got an ANA in 84, I got an 89. But then something happened. From 89 on through the aughts, in other words, for the next 20 years, Mead received increasingly major recognitions, and my role was erased. And so just go down through these. It's very interesting. He got in the National Academy of Sciences in 89. A really, really cool one on this was, you see that MIT Lemelson Award in 99? $500,000. I mean, we could have really used some. I mean, think about it, $500K. Like, wow. Fellow Award, Computer History Museum in 02, and then the National Medal of Technology in 02. National Medal of Technology. From good old George Bush, right? Yeah. Well, and then this was the one that really, I think all through this period I was deteriorating more and more into PTS. There was an event in 2009 at the Computer History Museum where the Inventors Hall of Fame gave a group of people membership in that, became members of it. And it was a big gala at the Computer History Museum. And let me tell you a little bit more about this. But first of all, most of these awards, most of them, were for innovations that were solely mine, that had nothing to do with. Okay? Absolutely nothing. And anyway, by this 2009, the erasure was complete. And take a look at what this says here. It's just this writer, Mike Cassidy, technology writer at San Jose Mercury News, he was just totally in awe of all this, and because they were honoring 15 who were responsible for breakthroughs in subject technology. It's in a way it's as if the Valley's founding fathers are coming together to be honored in person and posthumously. You see, the founding fathers. And Gordon Moore and Carver Mead and Andy Grove, these are this Intel group with Moore as their scientific genius hero, were centered in all this. And so take a look. Here's a picture of this huge spread in the San Jose Mercury News, and there he is. Carver Mead will be honored for devising the so-called VLSI method for designing chips. Okay? Now, what was interesting was, not only was I not invited, but I didn't know what was happening. And what was even cooler, fate is so weird. It turns out that months before this, a group of us, Bert and Ivan Sutherland, some of the people in my group, had planned to get together out in the valley. I was going to go out there. We're all going to get together. I stayed with Dick Lyon and Peggy Lyon. And Bert and Ivan came, a bunch of other people, to their house, and we had a big get-together for the old VLSI days. And it turned out, the evening before that, Dick said, I have to go to this thing where Mead's getting this award. He's always getting awards. Well, it was that was happening. I think some of the people knew it, but no one told me, and so then later I felt, oh my God, they probably thought I knew and was trying to act like everything's cool anyway. But I had no idea what was going on. You can't make up stuff like this. I mean, it's just, so anyway, that's what happened. And so what happened then in 2009, see, now that's not that long ago. So think 2009 to 2013, something was happening. Grinding away. What the heck is going on here? I'm trying to figure out how this happened. Hoping to regain some of my legacy along the way. Now, that's actually quite a saga, and there's a vast amount of things that went on. I collected, with the help of a lot of VLSI people, I began putting up a VLSI archive on the internet that had everything and anything people had done. All the original papers, all the work, all those notes and courses and everything. All the multi-project chips in the Stanford MPC-79, there's pictures of it, who did them, all the names, there's this huge archive of stuff, and it's all on the internet. But that was part of investigation behind how that was all happening, you see. So I put that together, and I started to figure out what happened. And then that led me to write this, and this is when the story started to be told. I simply stepped forward and told how the revolution happened. And here's some links. These links are in the talk's online. So all of this archiving of stuff, the investigations I've been doing, is all available. And guess what? There's some evidence that the legacy has begun to be reclaimed, that somehow some people have noticed and kind of figured out, wait, maybe there's something going on here. So I was elected to the Hall of Fellows at the Computer History Museum in 2014, honorary doctorate at IIT in 2014, and then in 2015 I received a really great honor, the James Clerk Maxwell Medal from the IEEE and Royal Society of Edinburgh, and then the honorary doctorate here. So that's sort of how that's been going. Okay, now, what did I begin to see in all this?
Excuse
Okay.
me. Has Carver said anything about this to you?
Oh no, we haven't talked. We haven't talked since really forever. To go back on that, what people need to understand is, well, how did he not know what was really going on? Well, it's actually very simple. When I came up with the design rules, I showed them to him, put it on the board, and he got all excited. And a couple months later, I was down in Caltech, and the graduate students that were working with him ran up to me, and they showed me his rules. And I think a lot of women are familiar with this process, and okay, that was that, and that was a key part of the book that was going to develop. But I didn't do something continuously ever afterwards. I didn't ever again tell him anything about what I was really doing. Okay? So he had no idea. He had no idea of what was actually being orchestrated. And at the MPC-79, I think he picked up a little bit on it then, because he was running to several different universities trying to start courses to use local foundries to do things. And so he didn't. I think he sensed that something was happening that he wasn't involved in, but and made a kind of an effort to do something. But then he got swept up in the awards, and I think he probably felt that just whatever he did in writing the book, which I read the book, but that had caused all this, and so you rationalize. But I haven't talked to him in a long time because, really, once the book was over, there wasn't any reason to talk anymore.
Why did you allow it to be called Meet Conway and not Conway Meet?
Oh, because he was first author on the book. You see, he was a professor. He was a full professor at Caltech. I was like, who is Lynn Conway? People were coming to Park asking George, who is this person? I don't have a PhD. I'm like someone out of the 1840s that's an amateur natural philosopher. That's sort of my style, a romantic natural philosopher. You see, and so I didn't fit the mold. So but the point is, in a way, I'm using the system because he has the name that would make the book sell, because people thought he did it. If they thought the work was mine, no one ever would have taken it seriously. Is this really? I mean, seriously, this is how stuff happens. It's always.
That's not entirely true. I mean, the successes will speak for themselves.
Yeah.
However it happened.
Oh, I'm talking at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. The creation of the book and having it take. It had to be this way. And Mead had to cover the base of knowing everybody in the valley so we knew how to make this stuff work and get it printed. That's a whole other story. So I spent a lot of time going every place in the valley with him, all the mask makers, all the various specialty places, so I could learn what I needed to know to make this all work. So he would talk with the bosses and I would talk with the engineers and ask them questions. And they would easily explain to a woman, like, you know, make it simple so I really understood it. I could actually, you can really be a good spy that way, you see. so I learned a lot of tricks that gave me the idea for the MPC 79, okay? But anyway, what I'd like to say is, throughout all this, we appear to observe the following effects. The Matilda effect. You see, you could think about the Matilda effect. You could think about the Matthew effect. You know, repression of women scientists, eminent scientists get more credit. Okay? But, oh, and I do want to say, this is actually what's so cool about Merton's thinking about this, is this idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy, which does linger in all of this. And it is a very important idea. Self-fulfilling prophecy is a false definition of the situation that evokes a new behavior, which makes the original false conception come true. The specious validity of the self-fulfilling prophecy perpetuates a reign of error. I just love that. A reign of error. For the prophet will cite the actual course of events as proof he was right from the very beginning. So the point is who did this work? I didn't do it. He got these awards. See? So the awards prove that he did the work. I just think that's so cool. Okay, but thinking about these, the way the effects are framed, repression or get more, is that all that's happening, or is there something else going on here? And here's what I came up with. This is actually, I found this really cool. On investigating all this, I said something far more subliminal, more fundamental is happening at a social level. Something that involves no errors, no conspiracies, no repressions, and no bad guys. Here it is. Almost all people are blind to innovations, especially made by others whom they do not expect to make innovations. And since for most people, others are almost all people, few people ever witness or visualize innovations, even ones made right in front of their eyes, including some made by themselves. You see? Because after all, what is an innovation? So you're getting some really tricky things here. See, so instead they look for cues from others when constructing internal orientation towards novelties they stumble upon. And not just whether or not to accept or reject a novelty, but whether to even notice it in the first place. See, if something weird is going on, and you really want to go look at it, but everybody else is, you know, why are you hanging back? You see, you tend not to do that. So, because we're all in this sort of social glue that's kind of pulling us all along. So from this perspective, the Matthew effect and Matilda effect are derivatives of this conjectured Conway effect, which covers all outsiders. So let's visualize this in action. Let's make it kind of real. Most students at MIT thought they were learning how chips were designed in Silicon Valley. Okay? And that's why they were excited. They were going to actually get involved in that back at MIT. But you see, really, this whole course was an MIT hack, if people understand what MIT hacks are. So the students did it without realizing, really, that they were learning radical new methods. And then the astonished reaction among the Silicon Valley Congress City then led to intense interest in reverse engineering. How did MIT do this? Not how did Conway do this. How did MIT do this? You see? It was an MIT course, MIT did it. And that set the stage for many research universities wanted to offer a course like that. Now, similarly, a lot of the MPC 79 users, students, faculty, and so forth, they kind of took for granted this thing was there. I mean, the word came down from Park, you run this course and we'll print your chips. It's kind of like, you know, it's just like, we're going to do that. So they just used it. no one realized that MPC79 was an even larger paradigm-shifting hackathon that was going to launch this new ecosystem. So I'd like to give you something to think about here. There is a classic demo that all of us at Park knew about. Actually, Engelbart did this really great demo where he lashed together a bunch of equipment and kind of simulated this modern mouse control PC thing, and he did it in a demo he did that became very well known. And you go on, you key in the mother of all demos on Wikipedia, and you get Engelbart's thing, and it talks about it and the impact it had on really as part of the run up to Park, and then everything that happened afterwards. So I call MPC79 the godmother of all demos. And why godmother? Well, you see, there's kind of there's a couple of reasons, but one is that a mother can have only just so many children, but you can godmother a lot of children. Okay, so like in the trans world, I'm a godmother to a lot of kids. I'm not kidding, a lot. Okay, there's also this cool imagery around godmother. Because you have that thing in the background, Godfather, you know, and I kind of like that, that sort of mystery and kind of like it's almost alien in terms of how people think about it. So anyway, what might those participants on MPC79 be thinking really? Well, a lot of people thought that DARPA was behind this because it used the ARPANET. And because shortly after it was done, DARPA funded the MOSA system being run, but we just transferred the technology and they paid for it to be used. So they thought DARPA did it. Now, you know, DARPA, in its own way, I've been there, and I had my Dr. Strangelove phase back in the mid-'80s, height of the Cold War, and you do need funding, and so you need to let Congress know the cool things you've done. So I would use an analogy here with Stoner's tremendously innovative small arms architecture that led to the M15, the modern import carbine, and so forth. DARPA did field trials that really proved out the close quarters combat and all the other aspects of it that made that the rifle that was used in Vietnam and so forth. And so DARPA sort of has had the image that they created the M16, you see, but it wasn't. It was a guy named Stoner. And so when they transferred this, people thought that DARPA had done it. So do you see how that slips through the cracks? The people don't realize kind of what's happening. So this VLSI revolution swept through the community without people realizing it had been deliberately generated. And of course, it became iconically connected with Mead, but Mead himself was never able to explain what happened, you see? Meanwhile, how could I come out and explain? There was no way while I was, continuing my career, I was afraid, even at U of M, I was afraid because people had, my career would have been over again if I'd stumbled out. But times change. The trans community has got its act together, and people are out there, just regular folks, saying we're here, and we're not afraid to come give talks. And so, let's look at this again. Almost all people are blind innovations, especially those made by people they don't expect to make them. So what it is innovations diffused via social processes involving subliminal subgroup noticings, mimicings, rejections, adoptions, adaptations, tradings, and displacement as a social process. And credits for innovations as social tokens are separately, subliminally assigned, gathered, seized, gained, granted, bartered, and so forth. Those processes of crediting are modulated by visibility, status, prestige, class, power, location, credentials, prejudice, popularity, influence, money, and accident. A completely separate process. Almost have nothing to do with each other. And And what's interesting is the visibility of crediting. The crediting process is so visible. People get awards. I got an honorary degree. and yet the innovations, the ideas, are so seldom talked about. Often because nobody talking around the wards or what it has any idea what the innovation was. People don't work hard to explain at the core what an innovation is, because then they won't seem like experts anymore. If it's so wonderful, it has to be so complicated, only a tiny number of people understand it. But what I've noticed is actually it's the inverse. It's like a new wave of art comes through, a new school of art where, think of the Impressionists. It came through and all of a sudden you just see things in completely new ways. And everybody wants to do it that way. And so in a way it's simple, it just shifts. And rather than trying to paint more and more accurately and precisely, see that had run up to a boundary condition. And of course the corollary to all this is that where the crediting is making the innovations invisible, it's also continuing the ongoing blindness to innovation. So it's possible to trigger large paradigm shifts right out in the open without people having a clue what you're doing, as long as you don't tell. You see? In other words, you can walk around and you see things no one else is seeing, and it's simple, and you're doing it, and people can't see what you're doing. It's so fantastic. And there is a moral to this, and that is, and this is to my reaction to all of this, is when weirdness breaks out in the end, you just don't get upset, do science on it. In other words, I've been able to maintain my sanity through this by actually treating this very weird thing that happened as a science project to figure out what happened. So now I'm doing amateur sociology. Okay, here's some questions to ponder. Have you noticed an innovation this week? Just think about it. Has anybody here noticed an innovation this week? You know, if you have, just, but I mean, it would be like, you know, think about what it might be, or could you say a few words about it? Has anybody seen an innovation this week? Yeah.
I've been playing guitar for most of my life. I've been playing guitar most of my life, and it's always very much a struggle. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that if I lowered the action on my guitar and used lighter strings because of my advanced age and my fingers not working so well, despite the prevailing belief that you should have thick strings on your guitar so you can sound louder and more powerful, I decided to go the opposite way and discovered that I'm enjoying playing a lot more because I can play a lot better.
Yeah, there you go.
And most people go really heavy on their strings, and it's all about male power and bending the strings, and Stevie Ray Vaughan playing heavy gauge strings and
Yeah.
fingers of titanium. But just turning it around and it's here so the music finally becomes enjoyable.
That's fascinating. You see, that's fascinating. Like, wow. And what you need to think about, all around the world, people are stumbling into things. But normally, it's not shared, or other people think, well, that's trivial, or whatever.
I don't know if that comes under your description.
No, it is, because for you, it's an innovation. And the point really is, we often make innovations that have been made elsewhere before, will be made again, and so forth. But it's that feeling of making one that's so cool. You felt that, and it's like that's what's so cool. And I don't understand why more people don't get that excitement. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just a new insight, figuring out something, and once in a while, one of those things will be something that actually could be earth-shaking. You never know. You see, so that's. Have you noticed one? Well, you didn't just notice one, you actually made one. You noticed the one you made. Some people will make an innovation and they'll just go with it, and they won't actually reflect at a meta level that they just did that and it was kind of cool. So that's the other part of it. So there is underlying all that, well, really, what is an innovation? And for that, I'd like to kind of get into how can we abstractly think about such things. Just there's some short stories we can share to get into a frame where we can communicate about some of the issues here. So let me do some insights from evolution, culture, and animals. And the first will be a thought experiment. And this one I really like. This goes back a long ways. The pictures are from John Taylor Bonner's book, Evolution, Culture, and Animals, back in 1980. And the story goes back way further. But what it is we're going to visualize the diffusion of innovation. We're going to call it an innovation. A process that ran sort of from 1921 to 1949. And note that what I'm going to say here, I actually unfolded to really mystified audiences back in 1983 and 94 in my keynotes at Spring ComCon 83 and at DAC 84. Back then, I published the MPC Adventures, which actually had a lot of the diagrams explaining all this, and I actually thought, in my naive sort of view, that all this is very simple and obvious, that I was trying to explain back then what I did. Do you see what I mean? Back in 1981, some of the things I'm saying here, and of course, people, I mean, it was like I had two heads, you know, it's like, because it was like I'm doing social science, and social science is like, that would be the biggest disgrace of all, would be doing something like social science. If you're supposed to be doing chip design, you know, you're up here in the esoteric engineering elite mathematics and you're talking about birds. But this is interesting, there's something to this. And what I want to show you is the mapping of an example space-time diffusion process, diffusion of an innovation. And what the innovation is, it was observed, the Brits are great bird watchers, and of course now we know that birds are actually unbelievably intelligent and social animals. And this is all fairly recent work, and there's great books about it just come out. But this little story is interesting. What the bird watchers observed, first starting in 1921, there's some area where they observed blue tit birds breaking into milk bottles and drinking the cream. And what happened was it was only observed in one area, but as years went by, it was spreading. Okay? And it got to where it spread almost through the entire area where there were milk bottles put out. Well, how is this happening? I mean, are they telling each other, look what I found, and I'm going to show you how to get it, and so forth? Blue tit birds are social creatures, and especially among that kind of little bird, you know, if you're social and you kind of end up someplace and there are various ones are kind of pecking around, if all of a sudden one starts pecking a lot, others notice. You see what I mean? And you might go there, and so there's a process of noticing, trying to mimic, get the food. So for some reason, the context of if you land here and it kind of looks like that, and you start pecking, this stuff inside is just wonderful. Imagine cream, how cream must taste to a little bird. Full of energy, fat, full of energy. So here it went, you know, starting, spreading. And that isn't the actual data, but it gives you an idea of a process. And let me actually go back. No, I'll leave it here for a second. When you think about what the blue tit birds are doing, they don't know that one of them made an innovation and that they're participating in its spread and its maintenance. They're just, and yet if they were in a place where there's no milk bottles, that wouldn't be going on. So as a social group, they came up with a way of exploiting what's in their environment and spreading that exploitation as a social process. And you're not worried about getting credit for it, right? Because really what you want is that cream. So the other thing to think about is, if you think of that as the collective has some knowledge it has, and the knowledge has spread, the knowledge is only going to last as long as that material external world is there to continue its maintenance that's mimicable. So in fact, when you stop having milk bottles delivered to your door, all this behavior goes away. And they forget that they ever did that. And in fact, if you suddenly brought milk bottles back, it might even start up again. You don't know, depending on how far they're spaced, etc., etc. And so there's a mystery there about what is it that we're all sharing and doing. We think we know what's happening, but how much of it is sort of ritual and mimicry and other kind of cool things. But the next thought experiment I'd like to do is talk about these wonderful monkeys at the Japanese Monkey Center, the macaques. And there were a group of islands, small islands, where macaques were in isolated groups on these different islands. And they were being studied to look at differences in behavior among the different groups to see if people could kind of track how different cultural patterns developed. So you had an area where you had several different groups that were isolated and so forth. And so what they noticed was a tremendous achievement by a particular macaque. And they gave her the name Emo. It's just sort of a female genius. Let me tell you what Emo stumbled into. At the age of 2, she invented the washing of sand off sweet potatoes before eating them. Now what does that really mean? What it is they pile up sweet potatoes on the beach and other things. And all of a sudden they noticed that she would walking into the water with the sweet potatoes and they were just washing them off, and then she would eat them. And somehow, maybe it was by accident, she might have picked up a sweet potato and decided to walk in the water for some reason. And then after eating it, it's like, wow, that's a lot better than when it's got sand all over it. But whatever, she started doing that. She found a way of separating wheat from sand by throwing the mixture in the water and skimming the wheat off the surface. Somehow she must have gotten that it was really better to go in the water with it. So instead of taking wheat and eating it and getting sand in her mouth, she would pick up wheat and walk in the water, drop the wheat, pick it up and eat it. But what's cool about this is these discoveries spread through the colony. They spread through the colony. So they were able to track the diffusion of this because other monkeys noticed this. What is Emo doing? Looking at this, and so they just, some of the younger ones especially, would just go and did what Emo did, and wow, this is much better. And so there was a kind of thing there where you start getting this sense of how it is that older generations that are already in routine patterns that work, and they know how the world works around them, are less likely to try something new. But the young, if they just happen to be next to some older monkey that does something weird, they might try to do it too, or they might just do something weird on their own. And if they stumble into something, it might propagate first through the young. And so now, and if you think about it, there again, they have discovered something. There's almost like a technology kind of thing there. See, there's something like people do, I'm going to throw this in water, pick it up, eat it, and it's just